This is Ali Vogel from Flexi Design, and today we are here on the podcast Flexible by Design with none other than Alberto Reales. So welcome, Alberto. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Ali. So excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to have you because you are one of the more interesting and mysterious people that I know, in the sense that I've heard tidbits about the work that you've done at Microsoft in your past, at Goldman, at Nickelodeon. And I know that you're up to some other really interesting projects as well. So I can't wait for you to shed some light on the industry and what you're working on, both professionally, personally, and what some of your passions are. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself so we can get to know you a little better?
Absolutely. So, hi, everyone. I'm Alberto Reales, and I lead analytics and operations for the America's Central Marketing Org at Microsoft. I've been at this job nearly 3 years. My background is in data science and strategy across various roles, and my focus is scaling insights, processes, and AI internal solutions to empower marketers and salespeople with clarity, tooling, and the data that they need to drive commercial success at Microsoft.
Awesome. So that role that you do right now, you said that you support internal needs. So is that mostly for the internal teams at Microsoft? Does that touch any external marketers that use Microsoft products? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Internally, mostly. As you know, everyone is deciphering the end user scenarios for AI application. And before AI application, there was digital transformation. And that is at the core of the products that exist at Microsoft today. If you wanted to go through AI transformation, the first thing you need to do is migrate. The first thing you need to do is deploy the right infrastructure, be able to migrate to the cloud, etc. So that is part of the journey. And we empower marketers to be able to tell that story well. And because that is all happening in parallel with what our customers are trying to do, in occasion, the internal use case ends up being the customer story that's being leveraged by customers, which is super exciting. Being able to build something internally and having it reach our customer.
So I know prior to Microsoft, you had started your own company and you were on that whole startup route for a while as well before joining the behemoth that is Microsoft, which, as you know, I used to work at as well. And they've been doing so many interesting things in the AI space, especially in the last 3 to 4 years. So tell us a little bit about your startup journey and how that brought you over to Microsoft.
Absolutely. So as the pandemic began, I was working in investment banking at a data job at Goldman Sachs. Let's say that I got more in touch with the core values that drove me as a person. I'm Colombian, so as a Colombian man, the need to give back to the region that basically gave me everything that I had, provided me with an education that gave me the cultural background that makes me who I am today, which I am very, very grateful and very, very proud to be. And in the pandemic was sort of like that perfect recipe. Is working remotely, addressing mental health care in a system that is completely privatized, not just in the US, but pretty much everywhere when it comes to mental health care. You know, there is universal health care in most places outside of the US, but mental health care seldom is part of that package. So being in that conversation and listening to the noise, sort of like reading the mental health care journey that we were all going through, you know, in early 2020, I decided, well, that's I think there's a vacuum for a mental health care service that targets Hispanics all over the world. Primarily, we started out of Colombia, but ideally we would find Spanish speakers everywhere that needed access to a mental health care provider, wherever they were. As someone that's like lived in many places, you would understand that regardless of, you know, you being in the UK or being in Israel or being in Argentina or being in Colombia or LA, you would want to talk to someone that related to you, that would understand where you came from, that you were able to be yourself in, because like going through a mental health care journey is being vulnerable, is being in a place of comfort where you can go through that conversation with someone that has the tools to give you what you need. And that's what we did. So we started with an MVP in early 2020. We applied to Y Combinator and got in the whole YC venture capital route, and going strong this day. I'm not in the day-to-day anymore, but the company is going very strong. It's 100,000 users have used the service across, I want to say, 33 countries is the last time I checked. So very proud of the work that Celia, which is the name of the company, has been able to achieve, and it's going for more.
Wow, incredible. So Celia, this is the company that Jaime Castro currently runs. Amazing.
Correct.
That's so cool. I didn't know that you co-founded that as well. And they are going strong. I think I heard they had an investment from Bad Bunny, among others, or at least that was in the rumor mill. So I think that got a lot of people excited, especially for people that are fans of the music and obviously the work that he does and supports. That's super cool. Okay, so you worked in investment banking, which is definitely on one side of the spectrum. Then you went to mental health in, you know, emerging markets, specifically in the Latin American Spanish speaking market. And now you've moved over to the enterprise world that is Microsoft empowering marketing teams and sales teams, specifically being an AI champion internally. What would you say was one of your biggest learnings from moving through these very, very different industries, these very different companies to where you are today?
I've worked with a lot of people that haven't been able to make the switch, whether it's from enterprise to startup or the other way around. I would say that every job can be a startup job. There's just a different threshold to the level of scrappiness. And I do think that scrappiness in enterprise, in the corporate world, is rewarded, but there's a different value system as to how much of that you can show. And, you know, there's the corporate citizenship aspect to it as well. I would say that leading with curiosity, having that ambition that drives founders is a trait that I've seen in the corporate world as well. There are some things that are rewarded versus not, but it is the unifying thread. Someone that deeply cares about what they're doing, that are mission driven, that understand and have conviction about the product that they're trying to advance, whether that's in research, whether that's in sales or marketing, design, etc. Like if you truly care about what you're doing, if you care about your customer, whether it's your own company or a company that you're being an ambassador for, that's a terms that I began to use. Again, I do feel like I am an ambassador for Microsoft. I just don't work here. So all of that, I bring all of that to work. And I think that shows. You know, I like to think that I've been fairly successful in the 3 years I've been here. And I think in part it's because I bring my whole self to work in that way.
That's very cool. And you started out in data science at Goldman Sachs, which obviously has machine learning component and a lot of analytics. And now you have skipped over a few different roles to being at Microsoft doing this internally. I'm curious to learn and to understand, when did AI actually become part of your vocabulary?
Very interesting. So I started the job September 2022. And main single reason why I took the job was because I really liked my boss. I went through the interview loop and I thought it was a cool job. But in September 22, I'm transparent about that always. I didn't think this job was the sexiest job. I was like, I'm coming from being in Y Combinator at this company. And I ended up stepping away from Celia, not because of the business. It was just, there was like personal decisions in my life. So there was no AI in that decision. I just like really liked this person that was going to be my direct managers. And my decision was, I think I can learn from this person. And everyone that I talked to as I interviewed confirmed that. It's like I interviewed with my peers and they all said, well, she's great. The time that we've been in this group with her, we've learned something. And a month and a half later, ChatGPT came out. So ChatGPT came out October 2022. And it was like ChatGPT and the model was 3.5. It wasn't that impressive compared to what we have now, but it was mind-blowing. And I want to say that 2 weeks after that, the Microsoft investment in OpenAI became public and the conversation turned into, oh, we're going to get this thing. Like this is a thing that we're going to have access to. So internally, a couple of models became available to pretty much everyone that had some sort of technical job, could just like fill a form and be able to access some like very, very, call it like very early version of what Hugging Face ended up becoming, sort of like a marketplace to just like plug in your model. And like now there's like Copilot Studio and AI Foundry, which are the internal, let's call it, environments in which like, you can build AI tools at Microsoft. That none of that happened. So I basically just like was like playing around with stuff in PowerShell. And as Copilot was announced as a product, which I want to say was probably the next summer, I immediately knew we have to build stuff around this, and probably the first version was great, but it was more on the consumer side, right? It was more of the chat interface, but it was just the promise of a product that in such early days was having such a splash immediately signaled to everyone in marketing. It's like, we just need to get more technical and start building AI products, start talking in terms of AI solutions, start talking to our customers in terms of like the platforms and what this is going to enable. I still think ChatGPT is probably the single best marketing product that has been released in the last 20 years. It got everyone excited about a new technology in a way that like Web3 couldn't, or the blockchain couldn't. Maybe we'll get into this further in the conversation, but the products that we have shipped internally that leverage AI are so simple in their premise and so impactful in the bottom line, which leads me to think, if this is the first thing that we did and we're saving this much money, then what happens 5 years down the line when like we've progressed to the next big milestone, etc. It's 2022. It wasn't 10 years ago. It was like 3 years ago, which is wild.
Well, this is really interesting because I also was at Microsoft when this was all happening. I was at Microsoft until March 2024. And I remember when Meetings Recap came out as part of Copilot. And this was this huge aha moment because Microsoft had all of these legacy products like Teams, which generally people would say, oh, this sucks as a product, as a consumer product. People used it because they had to, because Microsoft gave it for free with the Outlook suite, to, wow, this is actually one of the first, if not the first product to be doing this natively, to be finding highlights, to save us time and make our lives more efficient, especially with global teams, remote teams. This was really revolutionary. And we saw very quickly how Microsoft was adopting all of the AI capabilities that it has into these public-facing products. So you're coming at it from a very interesting perspective because your team, it sounds like, actually works on internal products. Can you share any products that you've worked on that you've just said, wow, this has made such an impact?
So, as I mentioned earlier, all of these are so intuitive. You wouldn't think about a Y Combinator company just releasing something sophisticated. No. Like, we went to the basics. I'll give you my first example, and I have like 10. One of the biggest line items in my world, or for my boss and her boss, the COO for the entire Americas organization, is the cost of localizing assets for events. And that's in-person events and digital events. So every fiscal year, the Microsoft Americas organization facilitates something between 2,000 and 3,000 events across 33 countries. It's insane. We're trying to sell Copilot in Brazil. You need to hire a local agency and send them hundreds and hundreds of assets, PowerPoint decks, flyers, email copy. Just like imagine all of that. And the price tag on that is insane. You end up spending 50 to 100K per event, per region. And then you have Portuguese. You have localized Spanish. You have Spanish in Mexico. You have Spanish in Colombia, in Argentina. You have a French Canadian, all of that. So the bill for localization, even if you just pick the top event, is still super high, or was super high. And at the very early days, we put together an MVP. And by the way, I'll just like preface, we are not an engineering org. Like I have a data/operations role, and slowly I carved out a MarTech sort of like product group, which is now one of the pretty much like the biggest producer of products of this type in sort of like in our area. So what we created was a very simple Azure app in which like you could put in the copy and your target language and your target audience and the format in which you need it. Oh, this is the body of an email, or this is a registration page, because like you have to like send the email. People go into this gated experience. Through the experience, they pick which session. There's like so much nuance and detail to this entire funnel. So it started like that. I did it on a weekend on like my production machine, and I just published it and sent it to someone that started using it. And fast forward to today, it is the same premise. It is now a much more sophisticated UI that takes all sorts of things. There's like all sorts of tracking, etc. So, that became an engine. Localization as a service is now a thing in our world, where other areas, in Asia and EMEA said like, we need that. And the incremental engineering work to make that go live was a week. But that's an example of something very simple that still doesn't even scratch the surface of what's possible, and it's already saving millions of dollars.
It's a great example. I remember when I worked at booking.com, we used to localize for different languages, and there would be manual translators for everything. So we would do hundreds and hundreds of experiments in the time that I was in this ML development center, just focused on which destination could we possibly send you to next, and not necessarily can we actually automate a lot of now what we know LLMs to do. And this was something that maybe it was in the back of the minds of, highly sophisticated engineers that were actually building these models, but to the everyday person, ML and personalization and what we could do with these models back 6, 7, 8 years ago is very, very different than what we see today in terms of actually changing behavior and really, really making an impact on the bottom line. So as you know, Flexi is a studio. We work with a lot of different markets, primarily the English-speaking market. For American English, we work with Brazilian Portuguese and the Brazilian market, and also a few different countries in the Spanish-speaking market. And we use machine translations for everything, right? And of course, we have that human element like Microsoft, but still there is such an advantage for the end consumer. And if you're a startup wanting a website and needing to localize for these different markets, not only can you save a lot of time and resources on the language translation, but also on the physical asset as well. One of the things we learned, especially in Brazil, is that people want to see images that look like them, that can be relatable to the Brazilian market. So we actually use and test different images when we're creating a website for, let's say, the US market versus the Brazilian Portuguese market. The images will be different. And we do use AI photo generators to take the base image and actually transform it to a similar image using AI for that, which ultimately, will save a company a lot on creative if they're not wanting to put the investment to, hire a lot of different people to do a lot of different types of assets. So it's amazing to hear your example with Microsoft, because it sounds like the impact of that has had a huge effect on the bottom line. So thank you for sharing that example. I'm curious, are there any other products that you've built that you've said like, wow, this has really, really made an impact on the business, on the organization, or just on the consumer as a whole?
Yeah, a couple. I'll do a quick one. So I think it illustrates the value of AI as a copilot, as a navigation companion. We developed an internal product that has nothing to do with AI, but is probably our crown jewel. It's called the marketing planning tool. Prior to building it, the way to orchestrate thousands of events and tactics and campaigns in the entire continent was very hard. You have governance across countries, you have different budgets, you have line items that go to different organizations, you have something that's paid for by a country, but then something that's paid for by a product area, but then something that's paid for by an industry, and the matrix of budgets, and then who does what, and then the vendors that you hire, etc. So every tactic execution came with its own level of complexity, and we built this internal system on Dynamics that basically allowed everyone to just look at what was going on at a given time. If Deb Cup, the president of Microsoft Americas, came and said, "What are we doing at Rio de Janeiro tonight?" She would be able to know exactly what's happening, for what product, how much it costs, and the customers that were going to be there, and what kind of demand gen we did, etc. So we were super proud of that. The problem with that, and I think this is an analogy for where we are today in the industry, is not the capabilities, but the adoption. So getting a marketer and a salesperson to understand how to use the tool, to properly have the inputs in order to populate the system correctly, so that all the other systems and the data cubes are enriched properly, so that everything works well, could take 6 months. Adoption is the barrier. And the simplest thing we were able to do was, because it was built on top of Dynamics, maybe a month-long project, was to have a Copilot on top of it. So you have an out-of-the-box Copilot that can crawl internal Microsoft apps. If you build something on a Power App, etc., you can add the Copilot functionality. It requires a little bit of work, but you can have a Copilot that's native to whatever you have built. And that was so simple, but it completely eliminated just this huge component on skilling, which is sort of like the premise of vibe coding today, you know? It's like somebody would sit down and say, instead of navigating through the UI, which, I mean, I would love to hear your thoughts because Flex design, you probably want to remove all those barriers, right? But someone that had never used a system like this, instead of learning how to navigate it, would just like simply open, you know, a chat interface and say, I want to create an event for 2 weeks in Mexico City or in San Francisco. And it will navigate to that, you know, to that window and ask the questions. All right, for how many people? What's the target audience? What are you know, and then just have that like hand holding moment so that it's done well, it's done compliantly, so that everything works right. So I'm curious to see how this is going to change the way that we train in the workplace. You know, it's going to change. I don't know if I have kids. How are my children going to think about product design or creating things when they can speak into a microphone and have something built itself, which is super exciting.
We had an episode that was titled Everyone Can Build Now. And the guest we had was one of the first designers at Gong. And Gong is a sales software that you're probably familiar with. It records and understands and gives all kind of analytics. And now everyone's like, oh, I can build Gong because I can use Cursor and I can use Lovable. And the incredible thing is that whether it's true or not, people have the perception that they can. And so they start to do and they start to tinker. And this leads us to ask ourselves the question, well, what is the best way to actually utilize and harness this technology now that we do have it at our disposal? And you, as someone who's technical, you said today you can 10x what you did just a couple years ago. And now someone who had no technical skills can build something. Doesn't mean it's going to have great UX, doesn't mean it's going to be visually appeasing. It doesn't even mean that it's necessarily going to fully work, but people feel empowered to build. And I think that this is going to create, like you said, with your future potential children, a generation of builders, that people that at least believe because they have some sort of tool in their toolbox, and that will only have this multiplier effect. So I remember when I worked at Microsoft, and this was something I wanted to ask about your current tool, one of the biggest challenges that we had in building was processes, right? You have this huge company, there's a lot of different stakeholders with different interests and different budgets, and getting something through necessarily to production was always a challenge. So I'm curious to hear about your product group today, because it sounds like you've been able to push many interesting tools, AI related, maybe some not necessarily beginning as AI related, but a great candidate for AI integration. What would you say has been your biggest tool for success in shipping product? What would you advise to builders that really want to get their product out of the door?
I will go back to my Y Combinator alma mater. And when you join YC, the first session that you have is with the current president or the partner, and they tell you what it means to be there. You know, you've made it through all these like tens of thousands of people that applied, and this is a huge moment. But the message they want to crystallize as you go on to build is make something people want. And I feel like everyone that's there and in that call in some way has done that. I don't know if everyone used those words. I certainly didn't. I wanted to build something for me, and I was like very mission driven about the mental health care for Hispanics all over the world. Hear it like that in those words. It's so simple. And that applies to everything. So in the startup world, you need to create something that has demand. Otherwise, what's the point? So, you know, you've worked at Microsoft. There is a lot of red tape. There's a lot of process. There's a lot of like internal, let's call it like not bureaucracy, but checks and balances. They exist for a reason.
Balances.
You know, I'd rather call it that, because I do compliance as well as part of my remit. So I understand why some things we need to be meticulous about how we build certain things. But when you unlock the want part of building anything, you can speed through that. And usually when we think about what to build next, the first thing I try to do is like I solve for the product or the idea that the most senior person wants the most, and that like I'll try to align what they want with whatever I'm excited about. And if I solve for that, then all of the friction goes away.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit practically about the building.
We work mostly with engineers and PMs. Our internal products are incredibly functional. I think
Okay.
you would probably have a heart attack if you look at them. They are not the most appeasing to the user. They do what they need to do. They are internal. We've had about a couple of products that are prettier and more usable than others, but generally they're very like brick and mortar, like can the thing do the thing? So not so much designers, but definitely the engineers, PMs, and we have like internal QA experts that just make sure that we're always connected to the end user, that we like find who the champions are going to be, that we're like documentation and all of that's like, very necessary in order to get that through internally at least.
So how would you say, I mean, you described your products as functional, but not necessarily beautiful. But oftentimes we find that with form comes function. So the role of a designer is not just to make things beautiful, but also to make things more functional, to go from A to B quicker, more efficiently, in a way that users can operate through and has less friction as part of the whole process. So I'm curious from your perspective, working at Microsoft on internal tools or working at Celia with a consumer product in which this form is so important as well as the function and the way that they are married together. What would you say is one of the biggest challenges you've seen with products that are AI centric and the way that users are interacting with them? What would you say is the biggest UX pain point that you've seen?
Such a great question. What comes to mind as you ask that is guiding the user properly through the AI function. And what I mean by that is a user, I'm going to use my design words. So sorry to all the designers that are listening to this, but like the way I think about it in my mental model is someone that is presented with a product and has no prior coaching or, just like is just put in front of a product will emulate their past experiences with similar products. But you'll sit there and you'll try to do the thing that you know how to do. It is, from what I've seen, 80%, if not more, maybe 90% of the user that will leverage our products or the AI component of our products has only interacted with some sort of chatbot as a vehicle for AI, which is great. A chatbot is awesome. It's ChatGPT, it's Copilot. You just need to give it a command so it like builds an SQL table in the back and gives you the thing. That has taken it has manifested itself in certain different ways. We've embedded some very light AI functionalities in existing products, and as we've tried to roll out AI products proper. So we have one that's more of like a machine learning predictor that's going to have, like a full AI component, but it just, the basic functionalities, it'll tell a marketer and a salesperson where to put their money, basically. It's an investment recommender. It has like nothing to do with like, creative, etc.
And this is all internal. This isn't
It's
even
internal,
an
right?
external.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's internal. And it has no chat. It doesn't have a chat, right? And that doesn't make it a bad product. It's like it does what it has to do very well. It's like one of the smartest things we've built. I'm super proud of it. But I have gotten the question a couple of times. I was like, oh, so where's the AI? Like, is it really an AI? It looks just like an interface and it's telling me a thing, right? I was like, no, well, it does. It's like, it's in the background, it's doing all these things and it's coming up with a recommendation that's like super informed in a way that you wouldn't believe, it's telling you, you have $20,000, here's where you should put them. And it's like, you should do that. But the friction becomes, well, it doesn't look like this chat that I know and associate with AI, which is super, super interesting. And like the last thing I'll say to that is, which I find super cool. Tied to that point, and the reason why I am like absolutely certain that like AI is not a fad is if you go into the Y Combinator LinkedIn page, you'll see every 3 hours the launch of a company, either whether they're being accepted at YC or they're like launching their product officially after going through YC, etc. But like you're basically like every 3 hours there's like, oh, congratulating this company because they raised money or they launched or this is their product. And I want to say 70% of the companies are like AI platforms So they're not, oh, this is a chatbot, or this is like an AI tool that helps you like design better.
I think you made two really interesting points there. One is about patterns. So there have throughout the history of UX product design, and I'm sure far earlier, if you look at more traditional methods of design, there are patterns that come with types of products that we design. So whether it be in architecture and having certain styles of buildings and certain features you'd expect to see in buildings of an era or from a certain region. In product design, throughout these different periods that we've gone through, we start to see these patterns as well. AI has become synonymous with having this chat interface. At least Chat GPT brought it back. Back in 2016, I remember I was working on a chatbot, a very dumb chatbot because it actually had no AI in it. It was all just, pure logic. Of course, the idea was in the future, we're going to make it more intelligent. And then that was very short-lived because it didn't really solve many problems. And then fast forward to 2022 and ChatGPT, and now we're in 2025. And this has become almost a must, right? If it doesn't have a chat interface, it must not be AI, which is simply not true because most of what's happening is actually happening in the background. And you even see it with what you said, all of the infra companies that are being built to basically support just a very small pattern that you see from the UI perspective. So one of the big trends that we've seen at Flexi and the work that we do with these types of companies is that a lot of it has to do with the thinking, the product thinking, and the way that we're designing the flows of these products. Because at the end, you're seeing a very small portion of what's actually happening from a technological standpoint, whether it be an AI infra company, or whether it be a company that gives you a prediction or gives you a recommendation rather of where you should spend your marketing budget, right? So much tech for such a small recommendation, but that ultimately could have a huge impact on an organization as big as Microsoft, right? Multi-trillion-dollar organization. So it's interesting that you've seen that from the technical perspective. We've also seen it very much from the design perspective, which is why, we started this whole product group around building and designing for AI products. And I'm curious to hear from you whether now knowing what you know within the AI space, having done it at Goldman, doing it now at Microsoft, and then having this period of working in consumer, if you would have designed from a technological perspective or from a UI perspective, the product that you built at your startup any differently today, knowing what you know would come in the future.
We've spoken with Jaime, our good friend, who is now one of the co-founders, the original co-founder I went to YC with, about this. As I've been working with AI more, of course I would send them stuff. Be like, oh my gosh, could we leverage this? Or is this something that Celia could do? And ultimately, even though I have all this faith and love for this technology, I don't know if for that product that would have had made sense. That there's a component of it which is the matching algorithm. When you first sign up and you get matched with a provider, it can always be smarter. But ultimately, the reason why people choose to start a service like Celia, which is mental health care, 90% of the times it's for the first time. It's especially Hispanics, very conservative, religious, patriarchal. So you usually have people downloading the app and going to therapy for the first time because it's private, it's intimate. You don't have to go to a facility and nobody has to know that you're doing this. And there's a human component to it. I think that's a huge selling point in social services, especially something that's as intimate and vulnerable as going to therapy for the first time. Even as an AI builder, maybe as a business and making it work more for OpEx, etc. I think that there could be things there in customer service and ticket resolution and all that stuff that everyone is doing. Maybe on that aspect as well. But at the core function of getting people to talk to someone about what's going on in their lives, I don't know. I think I want to stick with the human.
Last question as we wrap things up. What is the one thing that you are most excited for with the new technology in AI that's coming out?
Just the unlocking of the builders. I think you said it better than I did earlier. Just everyone is a builder. And when everyone is a builder, you have more things being built. For the entire time I was like training in my career, designers were in one spot and they would like hand off their work and engineers will build it. And now designers are builders. And I think that we're going to see a lot of that, like the advent of like vertical AI production tools that are built for use cases that are so absolutely niche and only evident to people that truly know that like domain. And before like prior to the last year and a half, it's like you're either an engineer or you're like this other thing. Like you very seldom you found someone that like could do both. And I think that line is going to completely be erased. I'm so excited to see like what people come up with.
It's an incredible time that we're living in. That's really, sorry for my use of this word, but democratizing being a builder. And I think that that's one of the most exciting things. We've heard this used and overused so many times, but now we're actually seeing it. Now I'm going to dinner parties and I'm having people pitch me ideas for these new businesses they're thinking about and just saying, oh, look, I already actually built a POC for this. As someone who, since high school or even earlier, has always enjoyed building things, whether it be sewing clothes to then building websites to then going into UX design, it's really a cool thing to see people getting their hands dirty and doing it. So before we leave, we have a little gift for you for coming on to the show. It is our Human for Now hat that I will get to you one way or another very soon. So I thought that you would like that because you had mentioned the human component. And even though we're just steps away from being robots, we always have to remember our humanity just a little bit. So Alberto, thank you so much for coming on Flexxible by Design. Thank you for sharing your insights and your journey. How can people get in touch?
Shoot me a note on LinkedIn or at alberto@reales.ai. I'm always excited to hear about people that have ideas and that just want to connect and network.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alberto.